The screen is black for a moment. Soft, ambient light fades in. A woman, Maya, in her late 20s, is sitting in a beautifully lit artist's studio. She looks directly at the camera, her expression calm, but carrying immense weight. Her voice is steady, but with a hint of a tremor she's trying to control. My grandmother left me her life's work in her will. A 150-year-old heirloom quilt she called the Storykeeper. She wanted me to be its guardian, to restore it, to continue its legacy. A week after her funeral, my older sister, Chloe, invited me over for what she called a family legacy celebration. When I walked in, I saw what she had done. She'd had the quilt professionally sliced into 17 pieces, framed them in sterile, minimalist white frames, and hung them on the wall. A mosaic of our history, dismembered for Instagram. My parents and brother stood there, beaming, raising champagne glasses to their brilliant idea. They saved a framed photo of the whole quilt for me. They said I could hang it in my studio. I didn't get a single thread. I didn't scream. I didn't cry. I just went home, and I began to sow my revenge. Here's the thing about being the family's quiet, artistic one. You're treated like a charming, decorative object, useful for handmade birthday cards and thoughtful gifts, but not taken seriously. Your passions are hobbies. Your career is a cute little business. You're the background character who adds a touch of bohemian flair to the family portrait, but you're not meant to be a main character. My family was a corporation, and I was the in-house art department. Underfunded, overworked, and ultimately expendable. The day they carved up my grandmother's soul and handed me a photograph of it was the day I tendered my resignation. We were in my parents' living room, the one with the cathedral ceilings and the cold, gray furniture that always felt more like a hotel lobby than a home. The air still smelled faintly of the funeral lilies from the week before, a smell I now associate with betrayal. My grandmother, Eleanor, was the only one who ever truly saw me. She didn't just see a quiet girl who liked to draw. She saw a cartographer of memories, a weaver of stories. She was the one who taught me to hold a needle, to feel the language of fabric. The quilt wasn't just an object to her. It was our family's diary, written in thread. Each of the 256 squares was a moment. A piece of a wedding dress from 1888. A swatch from my great-grandfather's WI uniform. A patch from the overalls my dad wore when he built their first house. Grandma could point to any square and tell you its story, its joy, its sorrow. And she passed all of those stories, and the quilt itself to me. Her will was explicit. To my granddaughter Maya, I leave the Storykeeper quilt, in the hopes that she will use her brilliant hands to preserve its life and add to its story. My sister, Chloe, however, has never been one for details, or for anyone else's hopes. Chloe is an influencer, not just on social media, but in our family. Her brand is curated authenticity. She sells a lifestyle of expensive minimalism, telling her hundreds of thousands of followers how to live a more meaningful life by buying the right beige linen pants and the correct artisanal olive oil. She speaks in a language of brand narratives, aesthetics, and user engagement. To Chloe, my grandmother's quilt wasn't a diary. It was content. Untapped, unmonetized content. When the will was read, she'd put on a masterclass in performative grief. She squeezed my arm, her eyes welling up on command. "Oh, Maya, that's so perfect." she'd whispered, loud enough for everyone to hear. Grandma knew you were the only one with the patience for something so delicate. She made it sound like I'd inherited a sick pet, not a priceless legacy. I knew then something was wrong. Her support was always a Trojan horse. 2 days later, she called a family meeting. Just her, my parents, and our older brother, Leo. I was invited, of course, but as a consultant, not a decision-maker. "Okay, so about the quilt?" she started, pacing in front of the fireplace like a CEO about to announce a merger. "It's beautiful. It's historic. But let's be honest, it's falling apart. It's a conservation nightmare." She looked at me with faux pity. "Maya, honey, I know you want to fix it, but what's the end game? You patch it up, and then it just sits in a dark box in your studio, where no one can see it, where no one can appreciate it." "Grandma wanted me to restore it," I said quietly, my voice feeling small in that big, echoey room. "It's not just about patching it. It's about stabilizing the fibers, documenting the history of each square. It's a long process, but it can be done. It's what I do for a living." My father cleared his throat. He's a finance guy. Numbers are his love language. Art is a rounding error. "Maya, we appreciate your passion, but Chloe has a point. What's the return on investment here? You spend years of your life hunched over this thing. For what? It seems like a huge liability." "It's not a liability, it's our history," I pleaded, looking from face to face. My mother, who arranges flowers and charity luncheons, just shrugged. "It does seem a bit selfish to keep it all to yourself, dear." My brother Leo, who sells high-end real estate and worships at the altar of Chloe's success, just nodded along. "Chloe's right. It belongs to the whole family. We need a modern solution." And that's when Chloe delivered her masterstroke. "I have an idea," she announced, her voice filled with manufactured inspiration. "A way we can all share it. A way we can honor Grandma that's beautiful, permanent, and shareable." She unveiled a mock-up on her iPad. A picture of their living room wall, but on it were neat rows of white frame squares. The quilt, atomized. We get it professionally preserved and framed. Each family unit gets a piece of the story. It becomes living art. We can all have a piece of Grandma with us. Forever. The room was silent for a moment, and then my parents started nodding. My dad's eyes lit up. Now that's asset management. Spreading the risk. My mother clasped her hands together. "Oh, Chloe, that's just stunning. What a tribute." Leo gave her a fist bump. "Sick idea, sis. Totally on brand." I just sat there, my blood turning to ice. They were talking about it like it was a pizza. "You want to cut it up?" The words felt like broken glass in my mouth. Chloe put her arm around me. It felt heavy and suffocating. "Not cut it up, honey. Preserve it. We're liberating the stories. Think of the Instagram post. The deconstructed legacy of a matriarch. It's powerful. It's a narrative." She smiled, seeing the horror on my face as creative resistance. "Don't worry. We'll handle all the logistics. You won't have to do a thing. We'll even get you a beautiful, museum-quality archival print of the whole quilt to hang in your studio, so you can still use it for your reference." They didn't ask me again. They didn't need to. The board had voted. My inheritance, my grandmother's dying wish, had been hijacked in a bloodless corporate coup. I was dismissed. The next week was a blur of silence. I didn't answer their calls. I didn't reply to the cheerful texts in the family group chat showing pictures of the frame samples they were choosing. I just retreated into my studio, the space that had always been my sanctuary, but now felt like a holding cell. I was surrounded by the tools of my trade. Spools of thread in 1,000 colors, bolts of vintage fabric, my grandmother's old sewing machine in the corner, and they all felt like they were mocking me. I was a restorer with nothing left to restore. My purpose, the one thing I was sure of, had been stolen and sliced into marketable pieces. Then came the invitation. An Evite, of course, emblazoned with Chloe's minimalist logo. You are cordially invited to a family legacy celebration to unveil the permanent installation of the Eleanor Vance Story Keeper Project. The name felt like a slap. Her project. She'd already reframed the narrative. I knew I had to go. I had to see it. I had to bear witness to the desecration, if only to make it real. If I didn't see it with my own eyes, a part of me would hold on to the hope that they wouldn't actually go through with it. Hope, I was learning, was a dangerous liability. I walked into the house, and it was filled with my extended family. Aunts, uncles, cousins. Chloe had turned it into an event. There was catering. There was a string quartet playing softly in the corner. And there, on the main wall, was the result of their modern solution. 17 white frames, arranged in a precise, soulless grid. Inside each, a piece of the Storykeeper. My great-great-grandmother's wedding lace, now isolated under glass. My grandfather's baby blanket, now a 12 by 12-inch swatch of blue wool. The square made from my own baby blanket, a soft pink flannel with tiny yellow ducks, was hanging in my brother's frame. They were like artifacts in a morgue, tagged and displayed. Beautiful, sterile, and utterly dead. Chloe, glowing, glided over to me. "Isn't it breathtaking?" she whispered, squeezing my hand. "It's better than I even imagined. So much more impactful than some dusty old blanket in a box." My dad came over and clapped me on the shoulder. "Great idea your sister had, huh? A real problem solver." My mother pointed to a small, elegantly wrapped rectangle on the console table. "And that's for you, dear, so you don't feel left out." It was the photograph, a high-resolution, perfectly lit, 8 by 10 print of the quilt, as it was. A ghost. I looked at the wall, at the faces of my family, all smiling, taking selfies with their little piece of history. They weren't monsters. They weren't evil. They were just blind. They had looked at a living, breathing story and seen only raw material. They looked at my grief and saw inconvenience. They looked at my life's purpose and saw a hobby. In that moment, staring at the fragmented soul of my grandmother's quilt, I didn't feel rage. The feeling was colder, clearer. It was resolve. They thought they had erased the story, but they had forgotten something. I was the only one left who knew how to write it. I turned to Chloe, managed a tight, brittle smile, and said, "You're right. It's very impactful." Then I walked out the door, got into my car, and drove away. I didn't go home. I went to the fabric district. My work was just beginning. This wasn't the first time my passion had been treated like a quaint peculiarity. It was a theme that had run through my entire life. Growing up, Our house was a showroom for my siblings' achievements. Leo's soccer trophies and Chloe's debate team medals lined the mantelpiece. My creations were relegated to the refrigerator door, held up by a magnet, until they were quietly recycled. I remember when I was 10, I spent an entire summer vacation researching and recreating a small, historically accurate Tudor-era tapestry for a school project. I'd sourced the wool, dyed it with natural pigments I'd made from berries and onion skins, and woven it on a small loom my grandmother had helped me build. I was so proud of it. I knew every knot, every color, every mistake. On presentation day, Chloe, who was 12, had forgotten her own project. In a panic, she grabbed a shoebox, glued some cotton balls to it, and called it a diorama of a cloud formation. My teacher gave my tapestry a B+, noting it was a bit obsessive for a child. Chloe got an A for spontaneity and creative thinking. When we got home, my parents laughed about Chloe's quick thinking. "That's our Chloe, always able to spin a story." They hung her a paper on the mantel. My tapestry went into a drawer. That was the pattern. Chloe's stories were celebrated. Mine were tolerated. Leo's path was clear. Business school, then a job in a respectable firm. He was practical. He was safe. I was the wild card, the one who spent weekends in dusty museum archives and got excited about the chemical composition of 18th century dyes. My parents paid for my art history degree with a sigh of resignation, as if they were funding a very expensive and prolonged gap year. "Well, as long as it makes you happy, dear," my mother would say, with the same tone she used for a distant cousin's questionable life choices. "But what's the plan? You can't just sew for a living, except I could." And I did. After college, I interned at a major museum's textile conservation lab. I was brilliant at it. The painstaking, meticulous work that others found tedious felt like breathing to me. I could sit for 10 hours straight, reweaving a single square inch of damaged silk, and feel more alive than ever. I eventually opened my own studio, specializing in the restoration of antique textiles. I worked with museums, historical societies, and private collectors. I built a reputation. I made a good living, a better living than Leo, in fact. But in my family's eyes, it was never a real job. It was Maya's little workshop. It was a hobby that miraculously paid the bills. My grandmother was the only one who ever called it my art. She would visit my studio, her old gnarled hands gently touching the fabrics I was working on. She never offered unsolicited advice. She just watched, her eyes full of a deep, knowing respect. "You don't just fix things, Maya," she told me once, looking at a priceless lace shawl I was restoring. "You listen to them. You hear the story they want to tell, and you give them back their voice." She was the only one who understood that my work wasn't about thread and fabric. It was about resuscitation. It was about memory. The Storykeeper quilt was her masterpiece, and our shared language. Every time I'd visit her, she'd take it out of its cedar chest, the scent of history filling the room. She'd lay it across her bed, and we'd journey through it together. "This square," she'd say, pointing to a patch of faded calico, "is from your great-aunt Sarah's apron. She wore it the day she got the letter saying her husband was coming home from the war. She cried so hard she stained it, see?" She traced the faint watermark with her finger. That's not a stain. That's a relief. Another square, a piece of vibrant, almost gaudy silk. This was from a scarf a fortune teller gave your grandfather in Italy. He said she told him he'd marry a queen. A week later, he met me. She'd wink. For her, the quilt was alive. And she entrusted its life to me. A trust my family saw as a burden. A problem to be solved with a frame maker and an invoice. Their decision to cut it up wasn't just an act of ignorance. It was a fundamental rejection of me, of the one part of my identity that my grandmother had so fiercely championed. It was them saying, once and for all, that my work, my passion, my very essence was worthless. That a photograph was good enough for me, that the real thing was better off in the hands of people who would appreciate it properly, by turning it into wall decor. That night, after leaving the celebration, I didn't sleep. I sat on the floor of my studio, surrounded by the quiet ghosts of other people's histories, and I made a plan. My family thought the story was over, neatly framed and contained. But I knew the truth. The story wasn't in the scraps they had claimed. The story was in the spaces between the cuts. It was in the memories they had discarded. It was in my hands. They had left me with a ghost, a photograph. So, I decided I would perform an act of resurrection. I would not recreate the old quilt. That would be an imitation. I would create its successor, a new story keeper, one that told the whole story, including this last brutal chapter. My first step was to gather my materials. This wouldn't just be about finding similar fabrics. It had to be about meaning. For the next month, I became a detective of my own lineage. I used my grandmother's journals, old family photo albums, and my own memories as a map. I sourced a piece of denim from the same mill that made my great-grandfather's work overalls. I found a vintage silk that matched the description of the fortune-teller's scarf. I spent weeks on eBay tracking down a 1950s cotton print with the same tiny roses as my mother's childhood curtains. Each square was a pilgrimage. I started a blog, a simple, clean website I called The Legacy Quilt Project. I didn't mention my family. I didn't mention the betrayal. I simply introduced myself as a textile conservator, honoring her late grandmother. My first post was a high-resolution photo of the original quilt, the one from the picture my family had given me. Beneath it, I wrote, "This was the Storykeeper quilt. It held 150 years of my family's history. This is the last known photograph of it whole. A legacy is not just an object to be possessed. It is a story to be told. I am a storyteller, and this is my grandmother's story, as she told it to me. Join me as I attempt to give it back its voice, one square at a time." Then, I began. For each of the 256 squares, I wrote a post. I would feature a close-up of the fabric I had sourced, and next to it, the story behind it. I wrote about Great-Aunt Sarah's tear-stained apron. I wrote about the fortune-teller's scarf. I wrote about births and deaths and weddings and failures. I wrote the stories my grandmother had poured into me, the ones my family had never bothered to learn. I didn't just write. I shared my process. Time-lapse videos of my hands, stitching, close-ups of the antique thread I was using. I explained the historical context of the fabrics, the techniques I was using to age them, to make them feel authentic. It was part history lesson, part art class, Pot diary. I didn't promote it. I just put it out there into the world. For the first few weeks, my only readers were a handful of friends and colleagues from the museum world. But then something started to happen. A quilting guild in Ohio shared one of my posts. A history professor in England linked to my blog in his newsletter. People were drawn in not just by the craft, but by the narrative. They were captivated by the idea of a memory being painstakingly pieced back together. The comments started pouring in. This is what legacy truly means. I'm in tears reading about your grandfather. Your grandmother would be so proud. My audience grew from dozens to hundreds to thousands. People started sharing their own family stories in the comments, their own heirlooms, lost or saved. The project was becoming a community, a quilt of stories, woven in the digital space. Of course, it was only a matter of time before my family found out. It was Leo who saw it first. He sent a link to the family group chat. The text was simple. Have you guys seen this? Silence. Then a text from my mother. Maya, dear, what is this? It's lovely, but it's a bit public, isn't it? Then Chloe. A series of rapid-fire texts. What are you doing? Why are you posting pictures of the quilt? People are going to get the wrong idea. This is a private family matter. You need to take this down. Now. I didn't respond. I just posted my next square. It was the one made from my own baby blanket, the pink flannel with the yellow ducks. I wrote about being the youngest child, the quiet observer. I wrote about how my grandmother had added that square the day I was born, telling my mother, "This one is a maker. Her hands will do magic." I didn't have to say a word about what they had done. The story itself was an indictment. That's when Chloe called me. I let it go to voicemail. Her message was a masterwork of passive-aggressive panic. Maya, I just saw your latest post. It's very emotional. A lot of people are commenting. Some of them are my followers. They're getting confused about the narrative. They're asking why I haven't shared this project. It's putting me in a very awkward position. It feels a little like you're trying to make this all about you, when we made a family decision to honor Grandma in a modern, inclusive way. I think you need to think about how your actions are affecting the rest of us. This project of yours, it's erasing our tribute, erasing their tribute. The irony was so rich, so profound, it was almost funny. She had dismembered our history for social media clout, and she was accusing me of creating a confusing narrative. She wasn't angry that I was telling the story. She was angry that I was telling it better, and that my story was true. I saved the voicemail. Then I got back to work. I had 187 squares left to go. The confrontation, when it came, wasn't a phone call or a text. It was an ambush. Chloe showed up at my studio. She didn't knock. She used the key she still had from years ago, the one I had stupidly never asked for back. I was at my main work table, laying out the next series of squares, the light from the window catching the dust motes dancing in the air. The bell on the door didn't jingle. The silence was just broken. We need to talk. I looked up. She was standing there, dressed in an impeccably tailored cream-colored jumpsuit, looking completely out of place in my world of organized chaos. Her arms were crossed. Her face, usually arranged in a mask of pleasant, curated engagement for her followers, was tight, with undisguised fury. "You can't just show up here, Chloe," I said, my voice calmer than I felt. I carefully put down the needle I was holding. "And you can't just try to ruin my life and my career online and expect me to say nothing," she shot back, her voice sharp. She gestured wildly around my studio. "What is all this? What is this whole pathetic performance?" "It's not a performance," I said, standing up. I felt a surge of something I hadn't felt in years. It wasn't fear. It was strength. "It's my work. It's Grandma's story. The one you didn't care enough to listen to." "I listened. I cared," she insisted, her voice rising. "I cared enough to save it. That quilt was turning to dust. It was a fire hazard. I found a way to make it beautiful and permanent, a way for all of us to have a piece of it. And you're twisting it into this melodrama to get attention." "A piece of it?" I laughed, a raw, bitter sound. "You mean like you have a piece? And Mom and Dad have a piece? And Leo has a piece? What piece do I have, Chloe?" "Oh, that's right. A photograph. You stood there with champagne and celebrated carving up my inheritance and gave me a photocopy." "It wasn't your inheritance to hoard," she yelled. "It belonged to the family. You were going to lock it away in the dark. I liberated it. I gave it a platform. You mutilated it for Instagram likes." The words erupted out of me, hot and sharp. All the years of being quiet, of swallowing my opinions, of letting my work be belittled, came pouring out. You looked at the most precious thing Grandma owned, the one thing she entrusted specifically to me, and you saw nothing but a branding opportunity. You didn't preserve her legacy. You merchandised it. You talk about narrative and authenticity to your followers, but you are the most profoundly inauthentic person I have ever known. You wouldn't know a true story if it was stitched into your own skin." She flinched, as if I'd physically struck her. "That's not fair." "Fair?" I stepped closer, my voice dropping to a low, intense register. "Let me tell you what's not fair. Spending my entire life being told that my passion is a silly little hobby, while yours is a brilliant career. Paying for my own education, while Dad funded your business launch. Making thoughtful, handmade gifts for everyone's birthday, while you sent a gift card from your latest brand partner. I have given every part of myself to this family. My time, my talent, my money. And in return, you made me invisible. The one person who saw me, who truly valued me, was Grandma. And you took her last gift to me, and you chopped it into pieces. You didn't just cut up a quilt, Chloe. You tried to cut me out of this family, out of our history. You just weren't expecting me to have the skills to sew myself back in." Tears were welling in her eyes, but they weren't tears of remorse. They were tears of rage, of a narcissist whose carefully constructed world was being challenged. "You're doing this to hurt me." "No," I said, shaking my head. I suddenly felt an immense, weary calm settle over me. The anger had burned itself out, leaving behind a hard, clear truth. "You're wrong. I'm not doing this to hurt you. I'm finally doing this for me and for her." I pointed to the project laid out on my table, the new squares glowing in the afternoon light. "This is my story now, and you don't get to curate it, too." She stared at me, her mouth opening and closing silently. She had no response. Her usual weapons, guilt, manipulation, social pressure, were useless here. In my studio, surrounded by my work, I was the one with the power. For the first time in our lives, she was the one who was speechless. Without another word, she turned and walked out, slamming the door behind her. The bell above the door, which hadn't rung when she came in, gave a loud, angry jangle as she left. It sounded like freedom. After that confrontation, the dynamic shifted. The war was no longer cold. It was out in the open. Chloe's strategy changed from private guilt-tripping to public damage control. She couldn't force me to take the blog down. She knew I wouldn't, so she tried to co-opt the narrative. She did a series of Instagram stories, her face a mask of wounded sincerity. "I've been getting a lot of questions lately about a family project," she began, her voice soft and trembling. "My beautiful, talented sister Maya is creating a tribute to our grandmother, and it's just stunning. What some of you may not know is that it was inspired by a project I initiated to preserve Grandma's original, fragile quilt." She showed a picture of her framed piece hanging on her wall. "We all wanted to protect her legacy. My way was about preservation. Hers is about reimagination. Both come from a place of deep, deep love." It was a brilliant move, I had to admit. She was trying to reframe us as creative partners, two sides of the same loving coin. She was trying to absorb my project into her brand. The comments on her post were a mixed bag. Her loyal followers ate it up. "So graceful, Chloe." What a beautiful way to explain it. But my followers, the ones who had been reading the stories behind each square for months, weren't buying it. They started leaving comments on her posts. "If you preserved it, why does your sister have to reimagine it? Where is the original? It's weird that you never mentioned your talented sister before her project went viral. Ask her why she didn't get a piece." The questions were pointed, and they were public. Chloe started deleting them, but they kept coming. The Legacy Quilt project grew beyond anything I could have imagined. A popular art and design blog wrote a feature on it. Then a national newspaper picked up the story. They called it a powerful statement on memory, legacy, and the art of reclamation. They interviewed me, and I was very careful. I never once spoke ill of my family. I didn't have to. I just told the truth. I told them about my grandmother, about the stories, about my work as a conservator. And I told them what the project was, a vow I made to my grandmother to keep her story alive. When they asked me where the original quilt was, I simply said, "It was deconstructed and is no longer whole." That sentence, quiet and devastatingly neutral, did more damage than any accusation ever could have. The project culminated 6 months later. I had finished all 256 squares. The new story keeper was complete. It wasn't identical to the original. It was its descendant. It was saturated with the same love, the same history, but it had a new layer, a story of loss and rebirth. It was, I knew, the best work I had ever done. A local art gallery that had been following the blog offered me a solo exhibition. We planned the opening for what would have been my grandmother's 95th birthday. The night of the opening was surreal. The gallery was packed. People had driven from other states to be there. They stood in front of the quilt, which hung on the main wall, fully realized and magnificent, and they were silent. Some were crying. They weren't just looking at a quilt. They were seeing the physical manifestation of a story they had followed for a year. They pointed to squares they recognized from the blog, whispering the stories to each other. That's the soldier's apron. Look, there's the fortune teller's scarf. My family came. I knew they would. They couldn't not. My parents hovered awkwardly by the door, looking lost and deeply uncomfortable. Leo stood with them, unable to meet my eye. Chloe arrived last, dressed in black, as if for a funeral. She walked slowly up to the quilt, her face unreadable. She stood in front of it for a long time. She saw the familiar squares, but she also saw the new one I had added in the very center. It was a square of pure, stark white linen. In the blog post for it, I had written, Square 257, the unwritten. This square represents the stories that are lost when we value objects more than memory. It is the silence left by a cut. It is the space where a piece of history used to be. But it is also a beginning. It is a blank page, waiting for a new story to be written. This is where our story begins. A woman I'd never seen before, with a sharp haircut and intelligent eyes, came and stood next to me. "It's magnificent," she said. "The way you've woven the narrative of its destruction and recreation into the piece itself is genius." She handed me her card. She was a curator from a major national textile museum. "We would be honored to acquire this for our permanent collection," she said. "A piece like this, it's not just a quilt. It's a document of our time." I looked over at my family. My mother was crying now, dabbing her eyes with a tissue. My father was staring at the floor. And Chloe was just staring at the curator's business card in my hand. In her world, that was the only validation that mattered. And it was mine. All mine. She hadn't destroyed my legacy. She had, in her own clumsy, cruel way, helped me build an even greater one. They were left with their 17 framed fragments, memories they couldn't fully own, while I had the whole story. And now, it was going to hang in a museum. Forever. In the end, I think I broke my family. Or rather, I revealed the cracks that were already there. After the exhibition, after the sale to the museum was finalized, a quiet, impenetrable wall went up between us. There were no more angry phone calls or passive-aggressive texts. There was just silence. The family group chat went dormant. Holiday invitations stopped coming. It wasn't a dramatic shunning. It was a slow, quiet fade to black. They couldn't face me, because in seeing me, they would have to see what they had done. It was easier to pretend I didn't exist. In a way, they finally got what they wanted. I was erased, but this time, it was on my terms. I used the money from the museum sale to expand my studio. I hired 2 apprentices, young artists who reminded me of myself at that age, brimming with passion, but hesitant to take up space. I taught them not just technique, but the philosophy my grandmother had taught me. To listen to the objects, to honor their stories. My work became my life, but not in the all-consuming way it had been before. It was joyful now, untainted by the need for anyone else's approval. The most surprising thing was the peace. I'd spent so much of my life trying to contort myself into a shape my family would find acceptable. I'd made myself smaller, quieter, less than, hoping that if I demanded nothing, they might grant me something. I thought their validation was the air I needed to breathe. But standing in the silence they left behind, I realized I was breathing more deeply than ever before. Removing their judgment from my life was like taking off a corset I didn't even know I was wearing. I learned that legacy isn't something that's handed to you. It's not an object you can inherit or own. It's the story you choose to tell, the work you put into the world. My family thought our legacy was a fragile, dusty object that needed to be cut up and protected under glass. They were wrong. Our legacy was the strength in my great-aunt's tears, the hope in my grandfather's journey, the love in my grandmother's hands. It was a living, breathing thing. They tried to kill it, but all they did was pass the torch to me. By trying to take the story keeper away from me, they forced me to become the story keeper myself. I no longer needed the quilt. The quilt was inside me. I sometimes wonder what they do in their big, quiet house. Do they look at those 17 framed squares on the wall? Do they see them as trophies of their victory? Or do they now see them for what they are, windows into a world they can no longer enter? Do they feel the weight of the stories they chose not to learn? I'll never know. And the strangest part is, I no longer feel the need to. Their story has ended. Mine is still being written. What they did was an act of profound cruelty, born from a blindness I still can't fully comprehend. But it was also a gift. They set me free. They forced me to stop seeking my value from people who were incapable of seeing it. They made me find it in myself, in my work, in the stories I was put on this earth to tell. The quilt I created hangs in a museum now, protected by climate control and security guards. It has a new permanent home, and so do I. So that's my story. It started with an ending, with a legacy cut into pieces. But it became a new beginning. It taught me that sometimes the most powerful act of creation can rise from the ashes of destruction. It's a strange and painful lesson, but it's a true one. Now, I want to hear from you. We all have a legacy, a story inside us. Has anyone ever tried to take yours? To belittle your passion? To rewrite your narrative? What did you do? Did you fight back? Did you walk away? Did you, like me, find a way to build something new from the wreckage? Share your stories in the comments below. Let's create our own story keeper. Right here, right now. A quilt of voices that can't be cut up, framed, or silenced. Thank you for listening.